You don't want love. You want familiarity. That's the bitter truth most people spend a lifetime avoiding. Because what we call love is often just a desperate craving for emotional safety dressed in poetic words and movie scenes. You weren't looking for a soulmate. You were looking for someone who made the storm inside you finally go quiet. Someone who'd never leave, never hurt you, never remind you of what it felt like to be abandoned. But that's not love. That's fear, calling it self-romance. And the worst part, you thought your trauma was chemistry. In this video, we're diving deep into the unconscious contracts you've been making since childhood. The ones that keep you stuck in toxic loops, sabotaging healthy love, and calling it intuition. We'll explore why your need for connection has been hijacked by your need for control, why the people you chase mirror your earliest wounds, and how to finally break free from the illusion that keeps you emotionally starving. This isn't just a talk about relationships. It's a dismantling of everything you thought you knew about love, vulnerability, and the architecture of your own mind. You'll understand why your heart keeps choosing chaos over peace, why stillness feels suspicious, and how your fear of abandonment became your definition of intimacy. But more than that, you'll learn the art of healing, the path back to yourself, to a love that doesn't demand masks or guarantees, to a connection rooted in presence, not performance. Because once you stop seeking safety in others, you begin to find something infinitely more powerful: truth. The false desire for love. People often say they're looking for love, but what they're really chasing is a feeling of emotional shelter. Behind the poetic language of romantic longing, there's usually an unconscious craving for safety, a haven from fear, abandonment, and the chaos of their inner life. Carl Jung would have called this a projection of the self's unmet needs. They're not in love with someone. They're in love with the idea of being rescued. What they want isn't a person, but a promise of relief. And when that promise is threatened, panic sets in. This confusion between desire and protection shows up in many modern relationships. Someone says they've fallen in love after 3 weeks, but dig deeper, and you'll often find they just found someone who listens to them, who doesn't judge, who soothes their anxiety. The human mind mistakes this calm for love, but it's closer to refuge than romance. Psychoanalysis teaches us that the shadow seeks comfort in what feels familiar, not necessarily in what's healthy. Love becomes a fantasy, an illusion crafted to keep fear at bay. If you grew up feeling emotionally unsafe, the idea of true love will often carry the shape of protection. That's why so many people fall hard for those who just get them after sharing a trauma story. It's not affection, it's recognition. They're not feeling loved, they're feeling seen by their wound. And because the mind associates familiarity with safety, it calls that connection love. But when you strip away the intensity, what remains is the same emotional pattern from childhood, just wearing adult clothes. Genuine love, though, is a whole other story. It doesn't hide you from risk, it invites you into it. Love says, I can lose this person and still choose to stay. That's terrifying for someone whose heart has been shaped by fear. When someone's inner child still runs the show, love feels like danger. And so, to protect themselves, they avoid vulnerability, even while begging the universe for connection. But you can't have both, true connection and total control. That's the paradox they're stuck in. And here's the real kicker. The more someone chases safety under the name of love, the more they sabotage the very connection they seek. They test, cling, manipulate, not out of cruelty, but out of terror. Because to love for real is to surrender your illusions of security. It's to admit you can't guarantee anything, not even their affection tomorrow. That's a bitter pill for someone who's built their inner world around control. But as we'll soon see, much of that fear has roots in a place few dare to revisit: childhood. Childhood wounds and the root of neediness. When a child grows up without emotional safety, their blueprint for love becomes distorted. They don't learn that affection is stable, gentle, or mutual. They learn it's earned, chased, or withheld. Carl Jung would call this an early wound in the psyche, a fracture between the self and the world that shapes all future longing. So when that child grows into an adult, their search for connection is no longer just about love, it's about survival. What they seek isn't just affection, but reassurance. Am I worthy of staying? This is why some adults feel intense panic when someone pulls away, even briefly. Their human mind doesn't register it as a simple absence. It feels like abandonment all over again. That old fear, rooted in childhood trauma, doesn't go away with age. It hides in relationships, disguised as jealousy, anxiety, or a need for constant validation. They cling not because they're dramatic, but because their nervous system was wired to expect loss. So they recreate, unconsciously, the emotional weather of their upbringing. Think of someone who keeps falling for emotionally unavailable partners. To others, it seems self-destructive, but for them, it's oddly comforting. That unpredictability mirrors the love they received early on, love that came and went like a storm. Psychoanalysis shows us that people repeat patterns not because they're stupid, but because the mind is addicted to familiarity. The inner dialogue whispers, "This time I'll be enough to make them stay." And so the cycle continues, each heartbreak deepening the wound to try to heal. The problem is that no external presence can ever fill an internal void. You can date the kindest soul on earth and still feel like you're starving. Because until that abandoned part of you is met with compassion from you, every love will feel like a temporary fix. This is where individuation begins, not by finding the right person, but by becoming the adult your inner child never had. It starts with presence, patience, and unlearning the lie that you must perform to be loved. Healing these wounds isn't about rejecting love. It's about learning to receive it without fear. That means recognizing when your neediness is really your shadow begging to be seen. It means noticing when your anxiety is your past trying to hijack your present. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Because until you do, you'll mistake every safe connection for boredom and every chaotic one for passion. And that confusion, left unhealed, will bleed into the very way you define love itself. The difference between attachment and love. Attachment says, "I need you to stay so I can feel safe." Love says, "I choose you, even knowing I could lose you." That's the line most people never cross. Carl Jung would say that attachment arises from the shadow's fear of loss. It's the child clinging to a parent's leg, not the adult walking hand in hand with a partner. The mind, shaped by anxiety and old wounds, confuses obsession with intensity. But one suffocates, the other liberates. And if you're honest, you know which one you felt more often. Let's break it down. Attachment is all about control. It needs certainty, guarantees, replies within 30 seconds. Love? It trusts. It breathes. It doesn't panic when space enters the room. People stuck in attachment often believe they're passionate lovers, when in fact, they're just terrified of abandonment. They say, "I love you," as a request, not a gift. But love isn't a contract. It's a state of being. You don't demand it. You offer it, with open palms, not clenched fists. Here's an example. If your partner takes longer than usual to respond to a message, and you feel a wave of panic or anger rising, that's not love. It's your inner wound flaring up. That's the voice of your unhealed self saying, "I've been forgotten again." This is where practical philosophy and self-awareness come into play. Pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, is this fear from now or from then? Keep a journal. Talk to your inner child. Meditate. Let art be your therapy. And if needed, seek psychoanalysis to explore these depths safely. When we mistake anxiety for love, we start idolizing the highs and lows. The calmness of healthy love feels boring. The chaos of trauma bonding feels exciting. That's how twisted the inner dialogue can become. But true connection isn't drama, it's clarity. It's two people who don't need each other to survive, but want to build something meaningful together. One is rooted in fear, the other in freedom. And unless we heal, will keep confusing one for the other. Understanding this difference isn't just about avoiding toxic relationships. It's about choosing to stop the cycle entirely. It's about turning inward and asking, am I capable of loving without clinging? Because the moment you answer that truthfully is the moment you step into real intimacy. And as we'll explore next, that journey toward freedom isn't always comfortable, especially when your entire nervous system has been conditioned to equate love with chaos. How the search for safety sabotages love. Most people don't choose love. They choose safety disguised as love. It's subtle. They're not attracted to who makes them feel seen, but to who activates their emotional wounds. Carl Jung would call this a repetition compulsion. The psyche trying to resolve unfinished childhood business by recreating it in adult relationships. So they chase unavailable partners not because they're masochists, but because that emotional distance feels like home. The chaos isn't accidental, it's familiar. And the mind confuses familiarity with connection. Imagine someone always falling for emotionally distant people. They say, I don't know why I attract these types, but the truth is, they're not just attracted, they're choosing. The brain wires itself to recognize tension as intimacy. If they grew up walking on eggshells around a parent, then anxiety feels like love. Predictable, peaceful relationships, those feel suspicious. It's too easy, they'll say. But really, they're just uncomfortable being seen without drama. Their inner life equates emotional intensity with depth, even when it's rooted in trauma. And here's where it gets messy. When they finally meet someone healthy, they panic. The human mind, programmed for survival, views emotional availability as dangerous. They'll start nitpicking, getting the ick. Suddenly the person is too nice. What's actually happening is that their nervous system is rebelling against peace. Because for someone who's only known love as pain, affection without fear feels fake. They're not rejecting the person. They're rejecting the version of themselves that doesn't know how to receive safety without control. This sabotage often looks like pushing people away with sarcasm, aloofness, or sudden disinterest. It's not malicious, it's protective. The shadow steps in and whispers. If you let them close, they'll see how broken you are. And so, they keep love at arm's length, all while complaining about being alone. They crave affection, but fear exposure. This paradox is the trap of those who've never known secure love. And unless that pattern is brought into awareness, they'll keep reenacting the same heartbreak under different names. The irony? What they're truly looking for, emotional safety, is only possible through vulnerability. But you can't be vulnerable while trying to control everything. The very act of guarding yourself kills the intimacy you long for. So healing becomes a choice. Stay in the loop of chaos, or start learning to sit with the quiet discomfort of being loved without needing to perform. And that, my friend, is the first real test of maturity, a test that opens the door to a very different kind of connection. The path of emotional healing. Healing begins with a brutal truth. Most people aren't looking for love. They're looking for protection. And until they admit that, they'll keep calling their defense mechanisms romantic standards. Carl Jung taught that individuation starts when we stop projecting and start integrating. In this case, it means recognizing that we've asked others to carry needs we were too afraid to meet ourselves. We want someone to soothe our inner child, to promise they'll never leave. But no one can hold that weight without eventually collapsing. The real work is learning how to self-soothe, to give yourself what you've been begging from lovers. That starts with small, sacred acts. Write letters to your younger self. Meditate while holding a photo from your childhood. Practice inner dialogue with that wounded voice inside. Read books like Homecoming by John Bradshaw or The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller. These are not quick fixes, but doorways into the self. Because the more you show up for yourself, the less desperate you'll feel for someone else to rescue you. This is where the adult self takes the reins. When you strengthen that part of you, the one who can pause before reacting, who can offer reassurance instead of rage, you begin to rewire old emotional patterns. The shadow loses power. The mind, once ruled by trauma, finds new pathways. Psychoanalysis helps here, not to find a diagnosis, but to build awareness. You're not broken. You've just been following the wrong map. And now, you're finally rewriting it. As you grow, your taste in love will change. You'll stop feeling drawn to people who leave you guessing. You'll no longer crave the highs and lows of toxic intimacy. Instead, you'll be drawn to calm, stable, emotionally available partners. But to accept that kind of love, you'll have to give up your old addiction to control. That's a trade-off. You get safety, but not the kind you can micromanage. It's the kind that asks you to trust, to soften, to receive without fear. And that's the invitation now. To love consciously. To stop chasing compensation and start choosing connection. To build something based not on scarcity or anxiety, but on presence. Real presence. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself, because it simply is. And while that may sound poetic, it's actually practical, because it changes how you speak, choose, and even breathe. But to live that way, you'll need to revisit the root. And perhaps, for the first time, ask yourself what love would look like if fear wasn't part of the equation. Now that you've seen what was hiding behind your idea of love, the question isn't whether you want to change, but whether you're ready to. Ready to stop chasing people who mirror your pain. Ready to stop confusing chaos with passion. Ready to meet yourself where it hurts and offer the kind of safety no one else could ever provide. Because if you keep waiting for love to fix what fear created, you'll stay stuck in the loop, longing for healing, but terrified of peace. So ask yourself, what would it look like to love without needing to be saved? What would it mean to be with someone because you want to, not because you can't be alone? Can you hold space for connection without reaching for control? These aren't easy questions, but they're the questions that set you free. And the moment you stop settling for emotional survival is the moment real love, conscious, grounded, healing love, can finally find its way in. If this hit you somewhere deep, it's not by accident. Your mind may be tired, but your soul is ready. Ready to unlearn, ready to reconnect, ready to become whole again. So don't walk away from this truth. Lean into it. Hit subscribe, turn on the notifications, and join me on this path of healing and self-awareness. Because you deserve more than protection. You deserve love that doesn't require you to disappear to receive it.